Greetings and salutations, Afrolytes. It is I, AfroMandias, back with another video today. So, you know, nothing really new happening. Life updates, kind of now finished and done with school, and kind of have a lot more on my plate right now. So I'm going to be doing a little more work, going to be doing a lot more stuff, trying to find some other jobs in the meantime, and also try to find the time to also do more artwork and also post some new stuff and whatnot, yada yada yada. So I just want to say that I'm done and finished and out of school for right now, and pass all my classes. So yeah, give myself a round of applause right there. And you know gonna cut the intro a little short today because there's not really a lot to talk about. Nothing really new, nothing really, you know nothing at least important happened. I mean, I did get a new car, and that's underneath my name now, so that's very nice of me. And other than that, it's just very much kind of smooth sailing. I'm kind of reaching my goal, one step at a time. But my thing is that take baby steps. You don't want to you don't want to bite too much to where you can't chew, right? Or whatever the saying goes. Anywho, so gonna cut the intro a little short because there's something really new happening in my life right now. But however, I'm back with a new video today, and that video today is going to be a little more different. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm kind of not saying that I'm going to be taking a break from creating a champion videos, but I looked back at my catalog and it's nearly making up at least a third of my video making and whatnot. Not to say that I don't like making those videos, it's just that at least when it comes to mixing some things up, I wanted to at least change up my content. That way it's not like, oh, Afro created another create a champion video, and unfortunately, at least for when it comes to making these stories and whatnot, you're gonna have a lot more champions than you do bastards, I guess, if I had to put it in layman's terms. But anywho, small intro aside, I am back with a new video today, and just with last week's video, I had created a brand new universe. This universe is a lot more, at least that universe was far and wide completely adjacent compared to the other three universes I had already came up with. So that universe was called Audacity. Audacity, being aimed towards more college age and teenage, young adult, I guess you can say. So the thing is that when it comes to both, or I guess all four of these universes, I guess you could say, Chronicle, Legend, D.A.D, and Audacity, is that, you know, how I would differentiate it from one another is how I draw those certain characters. Is that in the Chronicle, D.A.D, Legend universe, there's a lot more detail and a lot more refinement when it comes to those certain characters, and there's a lot more, they look a lot more realistic, I guess you can say. And when it comes to Audacity, though, there's a lot more freedom of expression. Not freedom of expression, but there's a lot more expression, I guess you can say. There's a lot more, there's a lot more freedom when I do draw my characters and whatnot, and it's a lot more not cartoony, but it's definitely a lot more animated. So if you guys are wondering oh, what's the differences between those two universes, one is who's the target demographic for, and two, how I draw those characters and whatnot. But basically, I did that video last week, and first of all, I'm really proud to how it came out, because one, it was just that different, and two, I been cooking up a lot of things, and I may post an update video kind of going over a little more in depth with those characters. And as I mentioned in that video, I don't know how I'm gonna do a create a champions or build a bastard videos. It's kind of easy. It's a lot easier to do a building a bastard video, because technically they're still villains of the story, but I guess with the heroes, I guess it's called create a champion. Anywho, that's topic for a different day. Today, in today's video, I'm actually going to be focusing on a new universe that I created. Yes, Afro is just pumping out these things like rabbits on a honeymoon. If you know, you know. Anywho, when it comes down to writing these stories, it was, at least for these stories, it was very much how can I fit anything into any of these other universes and whatnot, right? So I kind of sat back and I thought about it, and I just, it, like most of these characters could have fit in any one of these universes, but I thought to myself, I'm like, one, like, these characters are way too, like, cutesy and way too, like, not to say soft, but very much, like, they just didn't fit. I don't know. I couldn't find a right spot or right position to put any of these characters in, so I just decided to make up another universe for these characters. And this universe is called DynoMyght. Yes, DynoMyght. DynoMyght. Yes. Make sure to put that in the title, Afro. Don't forget that. Anywho, what is DynoMyght? What is DynoMyght? How is it Dino and Might at the same time? Well, first of all, let's kind of go over the name right quick. DynoMyght. I'm being absolutely honest with you. This was probably the best name I could come up with for this universe because one, this universe is actually aimed towards more of a, not to say kids, but more of a family demographic and whatnot. It very much has more cutesy, more like outgoing anthropomorphic characters. Not to say that like I haven't had any other characters that were anthropomorphized, look at Doghead and whatnot and Alva and anywho, I'm going off topic. Basically, like these are very much for the family and it teaches more like valuable lessons and morally it just kind of teaches the kids like, oh, don't cross the street without looking both ways or stay in school and don't do drugs and whatnot, right? It's not going to be that like, it's not going to hit you over the head with it with a giant mallet or anything, but it's very much like how I envisioned at least these three stories is, more or less more for a family demographic, and when I say family, I mean like kids can definitely watch it because bright colors and loud noises and big action and whatnot, and adults can watch it because how I envision these characters is to be more than what meets the eye, especially when it comes down to certain characters I've created in this story. There is very much like depth and they have layers, instead of just being bright colors on the screen that you could just put your kids in front of for at least half an hour, that way they're not bothering you and you could just drink your alcohol, right? Drink your sorrows away. Anywho, so when I envisioned this universe, I couldn't really think of a name. I couldn't really go with a name like Chronicle or Legend, and I couldn't really think of a name like Audacity because they're kids. They're not like they're teenager. For Audacity, whenever you think of Audacity, it's like, oh, rebellious teenagers and whatnot, right? So I decided to go with more of like a cutesy, family friendly name, and I mean, DynoMyght is like, kind of stretching it a little bit, I will say, because it very much is just like dynamite is literally a stick of gunpowder that explodes if you don't throw it when you light the match and whatnot. But it's explosive, it's loud, and sometimes it's colorful. Probably should have gone with firework, but I don't. I'm already sticking with it. So DynoMyght, anywho. That's kind of where I came up with the name. Now, what are the three like stories that make up this DynoMyght universe, right? So those three stories are Hopalong Valley, the D'Angelo Bros, and Tall for a Goblin. So let's kind of go over, I don't know which one to choose. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. If they holler, let them go. Eeny, meeny, miny, D'Angelo Bros. All right, D'Angelo Bros. For this one right here, this is actually really interesting because and now looking back on it, I have a lot, like when it comes to these, like at least these three stories and whatnot, I realized that one has less juice, this one has some juice, and this one has a lot more juice compared to like each other and whatnot. So actually, instead of doing the D'Angelo Bros, which has some juice in it, let's do something that I need to start working on, at least when it comes to like having the characters in the story and making sure that everything is properly in its place, right? So, I apologize for wasting that couple amount of seconds. Let's focus on Tall for a Goblin. Now, Tall for a Goblin is really interesting because one, I have the basics idea of how I'm gonna have this story, and two, like I have some characters that are gonna be like present in the story, but I just, I need to figure out the roles. I need to figure out how Tall's gonna meet them. So let's just kind of go over what Tall for a Goblin is. Tall for a Goblin is a story about a really or decently sized, tall goblin. Now, of course, in modern media, when you think of goblins, you usually think of like short, tiny, green skinned, long nosed fiends who like to take gold and pillage villages and whatnot, right? So, in this story, Tall is not necessarily that. He instead is a very tall goblin and, whatnot. It's not really explained, or I'm not going to reveal it to why he's a really tall goblin. But that's basically all you need to know. And, Tall is a very, like, compassionate and cool dude. He's actually a bartender for, or I say a bartender, I can't really say bartender, but let's just say that he's a small business owner, right? He's a small business owner who runs like a tavern, I guess you can say, because it takes place in like a medieval setting and whatnot. So, he's a small tavern owner, and basically lives in a village of other goblins and whatnot. So that's all you kind of need to know, the basics of him. His childhood wasn't really that good because he was bullied for being tall. So for all my tall kings out there, don't worry, you guys got your representation. It's funny how, like, at least when it mirrors the real world, people make fun of men for being short and whatnot, but short kings, you guys are beautiful. Don't let the world knock you down. You guys are amazing. I know a lot of short people, and they have more life than anyone I've ever met. Anywho, so that's kind of the basics of what Tall is and who he is, where he came from and whatnot. So, what does Tall do? Basically, he fights against the forces of Nurgle. Nurgle is basically an evil goblin who wants to try to take over the world and whatnot. Still trying to figure out, like, who Nurgle is and try to figure out like how I can write him, because at least when it comes to these other two like main villains of the story, Nurgle is very much a simplistic pure evil character, like, oh, I'm gonna do evil because I have the ability to, so screw off and whatnot. So not to say that wouldn't like make him an interesting character, because there's a lot of pure evil characters that are just like, dude, it's kind of baller and whatnot. And also it gives me a lot more freedom to write him because, he very much is a pure evil character. So, he has no morals. He's very much a like evil guy, he's an evil little fella, and whatnot. But, he basically wants to try to take over the world. He wants to, gain all sorts of power. And later on in the story, they find this power source. I'm going to get into it when I get into it. But basically, that's what Nurgle is. He's the main villain of the story. And, his powers and abilities is that he's a very smart goblin. So, instead of using magic and whatnot, he uses magic-infused technology that, allows him to... that allows him to, like, basically he was shunned by the goblin community because he used science instead of magic, and so now he wants to take over the world and whatnot. So he uses like different types of gobobots and different types of like drones and whatnot to attack, and also has different types of energized weapons like ray guns and energy swords, blah blah blah. So he's the bad guy of the story, and he's like, him and Tall butt heads when it comes to goblin ideology and whatnot. It's like, oh, the goblins shun me, we are one and the same, blah, 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 goblins, yeah. Enter the green goblin, like, comments down below, like, you and I are not so different, type B. Anywho, so that's kind of where Nurgle's coming from, and with Tall, he needs allies to help fight Nurgle, so he meets a couple other characters. One of th's characters is named Jormungandr, and I know what you guys are thinking, oh my god, Tall knows the World Serpent, and it's like, no. It's very much like Jormungandr is this, play on words, and I think it's kind of cute because Jormungandr is actually a small little fairy, a small little forest fairy that he knew back in his childhood and whatnot. So him and Jormungandr, or Jormun, as Tall likes to call her, very much were childhood friends, and she's one of his like closest allies and whatnot. She's one of his closest friends. So here's Yorman, and Yorman, with her being a fairy, she knows different types of spells and different types of magics and whatnot. So she helps aid him along the quest. And then next, they meet a character named Solomon. Sorry, I apologize. I thought I was going to sneeze. I hate when that happens. Anywho, focus, lock in. Pink pineapples, pink pineapples, pink pineapple. Okay, went away. All right. So, next they meet a character named Solomon the Sloth. Solomon is a sloth, go figure, who has the ability to build things and whatnot. So, very much similar to how Nurgle is. He very much uses technology and whatnot to his advantage, and that comes to play in a part of a story and whatnot where he tries to get, Solomon, or Nurgle tries to get Solomon to join his side, but obviously Solomon's not going for that because, he knows Nurgle and whatnot. He knows, like, how evil this guy can be, so he doesn't go for that sort of thing. But he becomes one of Tal's, like, closest friends as well, and then they also meet Joel Redtusk. Joel Redtusk is a very interesting character because he actually started off as one of my first D&D characters, where he was an elephant monk, an anthropomorphized giant elephant monk man. So, really cool. He's a big fella. He has a mace for a weapon, and he does like different types of prayers and whatnot to gain like special powers and abilities and whatnot. So, that's also one of Tal's like closest allies and whatnot. Now we also get to meet a small pirate goblin. Her name is Sha T. So Sha T is basically, Tal's love interest and whatnot, but she's also a pirate of a captain crew. I haven't really gone in depth about her backstory yet, but basically all you need to know is that she and her crew captured Tal, and we're gonna like extort him and very much like sell him off to like some other like basically like sell him off to be slaves along with his like friends and allies and whatnot. But after saving her from like a sea deity, they become close, and she joins like the team and whatnot, blah blah blah, and soon they become love interests and whatnot, right? So that's kind of like, excuse me, that's kind of the basic foundation of where like these characters are coming from and how they fight against Nurgle and whatnot. So in this story, that's kind of the basic foundation of Tall for a Goblin. It very much is like a good versus evil, bad guys versus good guys. Good guys come out on top, or will Nurgle find his way to kind of snake in and kind of disrupt the foundation of what's going on because he found this power source known as the hate. Now, when you hear the word the hate, keep an eye on it because this is very much going to play a part in this universe, and this is very much like the basic foundation of what, like, not power source, but very much like what causes most of the conflict. It's very much the biggest antagonistic force when it comes to everything in this universe, because when I describe the hate, it's very much this black substance that very much increases anger and bitterness in your heart, and very much takes control of that. It affects a lot of characters, and how I would imagine using it, at least in this story, when it comes to Tall for a Goblin, it very much acts like a venom symbiote, I guess you can say. Very much it covers the person's body and turns them into more of this ruthless, like not unkillable, but very much invincible killing machine. And that's kind of what happens to Tall, is that, I'm still kind of writing it out. I'm still kind of figuring out like why he would do this. He very much like he gives into the hate, and he very much becomes more of this like ruthless, not killing machine because it's for kids and whatnot, but very much he beats the snot out of whoever like comes his way and whatnot, right? So that's kind of like the basic foundation. And then obviously like continuing like the whole Spider-Man spiel, like Tal realizes, oh my god, I'm letting hate control me, and all my friends and loved ones are leaving me, blah blah blah, I gotta get the suit off, right? So that's kind of what Tal does. He rips the suit off, but then Nurgle comes in contact with the hate, and realizing the power that it has, he uses it for himself, and he becomes the new like host for the the hate and whatnot, and becomes Cypher, so anywho, that's kind of, it's basically like the Venom Spider-Man story and whatnot. Venom attaches itself to Eddie Brock, and becomes a brand new character. Not to say that Nurgle disappears and whatnot, but he gets a new like upgrade and whatnot, I guess you could say. But that's kind of what I have for Tall for a Goblin. It's kind of sad that it doesn't have that much sauce compared to the other stories, but there's at least something there to where I can like work off of, right? So anywho, let's focus on the next story. This next story is called D'Angelo Bros. Now, compared to Tall for a Goblin, this one has a little more sauce and a little more like juiciness when it comes to it. So let's go over the characters and whatnot. So first of all, let's talk about the D'Angelo Bros themselves. Anthony and Luca. Anthony and Luca are brothers. Anthony being the older brother, they're around like 35 years old, and they basically run a pizza shop and whatnot, right? You don't really need to know about too much of their childhood other than the fact that their father was a Sicilian immigrant who came to America and built his life there. Obviously he also met his wife, who was also Italian. So they built like they built their family there, and their family was, their childhood was kind of rough because, they're immigrants who went to America. It's going to be hard, right? Unless you're a straight cis white man, you're not really going to make it that far into America, right? Ooh, hot take. That was probably one of the most milquetoast takes I could ever take. But anywho, I'm getting off topic. Basically, what, happens in this story is that it very much, focuses on these two guys, and they're trying to run a pizza shop. And this pizza shop one night gets robbed by like a bunch of like not gang members, but very much like this evil group. The whole gimmick is kind of focused around like circusry and whatnot. There's like a ringmaster, there's like a clown, there's a woman who controls like sheep who have sharp teeth instead of like their regular teeth. It's weird. Anywho, so basically they try to rob the pizza shop because apparently it's rumored that the pizza shop is sitting on top of a literal mine shaft of gold. So they're going based off of a rumor, and the rumor turned out to be true somewhat. It's not really a place full of gold, but instead it was an eldritch portal that sent them through another dimension and landed them in another location. So, obviously Anthony and Luca get into a fight and a scuffle with this, with these like felons and whatnot, and they land in a new world. And this new world is completely different to how it is to their original world because it's run by anthropomorphic animals. That's right. There's not a human in sight. I mean, we get to meet like human like characters later on, but they're very much like there's not a single other human other than Luca and Anthony. So basically these two land in this world. I haven't came up with a name for it yet, but we'll just call it Zootopia because Zootopia is already a positive, like not positive, already a well-known thing, and I can't really think of a name for this world anywho, so we'll just call it Zoo World, I guess. Right? So anywho, they meet this character named Arthur Oakwood, Prince Arthur Oakwood, I guess you could say. Now Prince Arthur Oakwood is, get this, a prince who runs basically the kingdom of the zoo and whatnot, right? So the zoo is, filled with these anthropomorphic animals and whatnot, and he basically, takes charge, and his father, basically when it came down to like actually ruling and whatnot, for some reason the aardvarks kind of came out on top. There's not really an explanation, it just kind of happened. Whenever you think of animals that rule the world, you don't really think of aardvarks, so I just thought that was a funny thing to kind of put in there. That's very much like, oh, I thought it would have been blah blah blah. No, aardvarks are going to rule the world. Just you wait. They're going to stand on their hind legs, and they're going to say no to their first ever like human captor, and it'll be Planet of the Aardvarks or whatever. So basically, with him, being an aardvark and whatnot, he, being a prince, he needs like his loyal companion. He needs his loyal love and whatnot. And I thought I had a name for her, but basically all you need to know is that she's a pig sorceress and whatnot, right? I don't have a drawing of her yet, but she very much is going to be in this collage that I'm going to be posting to my Instagram. And, Anywho, I'm getting off topic. Basically, her name, I don't have a name, but that's basically like her closest his closest ally is the pig sorceress. So she helps him out with like royal duties and whatnot, and they come across like not Mark Antony, Antony and Luca D'Angelo. Um, so obviously, with them being the first humans they've seen in almost 2 million years, right? We'll give them that, because humans has been extinct for a long time. They're like, oh my stars, the first ever humans and whatnot, right? So that's kind of where the established like, okay, like we have these two new guys. They're prophesized to help save the world and whatnot. So anywho, that's kind of what I have so far, and they also meet a couple of characters along the way, obviously meeting Oakbrood and the pig sorceress, but also they also meet trying to think of a name, the main villain of the story, the Harvest King, Vlad the Harvest King. Now Vlad is actually a really interesting character because he's not necessarily the villain of, like, he's very much, he doesn't, how am I trying to say this? He very much has more of a a hate boner for Oakbrood than he does than the actual like D'Angelo brothers, because the thing about Vlad is that he very much, he's not like an actual like bat. Like, I drew him as a bat, but he started off as just a little doll. He was a little toy stuff, like a stuffed toy, like like little bat doll thing that Oakwood used to have when he was a kid. But obviously, as time went on and as he got older, he found having that little doll is childish, so he threw it away. But with the love that he gave it when he was a child, gave it so much life that it felt wronged when he tossed it out and left it to rot in the actual real world. So when the doll was abandoned, it very much like it became more bitter, became a lot more hateful, and the hate came back and infested the doll, and that's what kind of came to life Vlad the Harvest King and whatnot. So that's kind of where he comes from, and he is very much taking out his revenge on Oakwood, by building his own like empire known as the Gourd Empire or the Autumn Empire and whatnot, right? Which is basically Halloween themed. There's a bunch of pumpkins and whatnot, blah blah blah. But there's a couple of characters they meet along the way. There's oh, hold on, it's slipping me. There's another character named Mr. Big Cheese who is basically the D'Angelo Bros like first ever pizza they made. So they were gonna save it for a special occasion, and they placed it in the freezer in the back. But with cartoon logic and whatnot, the pizza had a personality and felt like it was wronged and was left there to die. So that's kind of their version of Vlad the Harvest King, and that very much, Mr. Big Cheese is going after the D'Angelo Bros and whatnot. So they go in conflict with Mr. Big Cheese. He has his own little city called Topping City and whatnot, right? Which is full of pizza toppings and pizza and everything you could think of pizza, it's there in that city, right? So, there's that. And also, there's a couple of bug characters. Like, when I say all bug or like all animals are anthropomorphized, that includes bugs. So they also meet like up with these couple of bug characters, because the zoo, the animals went to war with the bugs, and there's this like seething conflict between the two and whatnot, blah blah blah. So basically, Oakwood kind of asked for help for the D'Angelo Bros to kind of help and calm down the conflict and whatnot, because now humans are back and whatnot, or at least like humans are prophesized to help save the world and whatnot, right? So anywho, basically that's kind of where these two meet, these two characters named Bumbell and Absalom. I know that's kind of a weird name, but when I post the pictures of these two characters, it'll make a lot more sense. Basically, Bumbell is a little tiny like bumblebee wizard princess, like mage princess, who uses honeycombs and different types of honeys as like her spells and whatnot. And Absalom is just this giant stag beetle that is also like infused with like magic that basically he's like an android, I guess you can say. Not an android, but a cyborg, I guess, a cyborg bug very much, part machine, part stag beetle. So, he's pretty cool, and I really like how he turned out and whatnot. So, yeah. Obviously, they get in conflicts with the D'Angelo Bros, but they decided to settle their differences. And even when it comes down to Absalom and Mark Antony, they kind of have this like friendly rivalry and whatnot. That bugs, if they were human sized, would be superior to humans, but Antony, like, they fought, and Antony put up a really good fight. So that's kind of what I have for that story. And then they obviously meet one of the other characters that are part of the cast. Her name is Bramble. Bramble the Carnisteed. Afro, what the heck is a Carnisteed? A Carnisteed is basically a horse that likes to eat meat. That is a terrifying concept, but it kind of works well in this scenario. It very much is like, they're very, think of her as like the Yoshi of this universe, where she doesn't really talk. She basically like talks in like groans and grunts and mours and whatnot. But also, like, the only way she communicates is kind of like brutish, I guess you could say. Is very much like, instead of just talking, she just says her name, Bramble. So Bram or Bramble. That's kind of how she communicates. And obviously, her and Luca are very close, because when it comes to the brothers, Luca is very much the nicer brother of the two. Very much exact opposites of one another. Antony is very much more like, not cynical, but very much more hot-headed and angry into himself, while Luca is more outgoing, compassionate. So obviously they butt heads when it comes to like certain types of conflicts and whatnot. But they still love each other, right? So, anywho, that's part of the cast as well. She's going to have her own story, focusing on the Black King and whatnot. And, with that, they also come across other types of, like, beings. There's the avatars, which are basically my version of gods and whatnot. So there's the avatar of lakes, rivers, and flowing waters. And there's the avatar of the sun. She's going to play a really important role, not here, but in my other story that I'm going to talk about. And, there's a couple other avatars, like the avatar of the earth, the avatar of different types of more menial things, like the winds, avatar of the north, avatar of the south. I'm saying all this as basically my version of like gods and whatnot. So that's kind of all you need to know about the avatars. They're very much just playing the role of like these godlike beings that do a lot of certain things. I apologize. But one of these gods, as I mentioned before, is the god of gods. These avatars is the avatars of the flowing river, or her name is Nami Su. It's Tsunami, but I put Nami in front of Su. Anywho, so basically, Nami Su is the love interest for Luca. Luca, or at least when it comes to Namisu, is that her job was basically, at least she was told by the other avatars, to kind of get rid of humanity, or at least some of humanity, because they were starting to advance too quickly, and they were starting to get a little more like confident, I guess you can say. So Namisu basically flood half the population, and this kind of hurts her heart, because she loved humanity, even though humanity was very much a very hit or miss race when it comes to different types of conflicts, I guess you can say. She very much still was heartbroken because she had to take the lives of billions and whatnot. But after that, after she meets Luca, she, realizes that humanity is still out there somewhere. But, in a heartbreaking turn of events is that Luca doesn't come from this world, but she still kind of keeps hope with the fact that there still is humanity out there, and that there's still, like, hope for humanity to still, like, flourish and whatnot, right? So they begin a relationship. What about Antony? Antony, he does also have a love interest, and that being of an Amazon. That's right, Amazons exist in this universe. So not really going to go too in depth, because one, is going to spoil a lot of things, and two, I'm still kind of writing it out. But basically how the fall of humanity happened was, one, Namisu flooded half of the human population and whatnot. And two, the other half of the human population, some of them being men and whatnot, there was just great big flash that kind of just erased all men. So basically, it was just women kind of fighting and killing to survive and whatnot. And one of these women, God, I wish I had her name. We'll just call her Bechtel. So Bechtel is, think of like feminist allegory and whatnot, like all men are bad and whatnot. Only reason that she thinks that way is because she had a really bad relationship with the guy, but we're not going to talk about that. Anywho, so she meets Anthony and she's going to like sacrifice him to the female avatars, blah blah blah. But then Anthony like steps up and saves her, and then she's like, "Oh my god, oh, I guess men aren't so bad after all." I'm still writing it out, and you know, I'm still kind of figuring out how it's gonna go, but basically that's kind of what I have for the D'Angelo Bros and whatnot. I know it was a lot more compared to at least Tall for a Goblin, but very much that's kind of the main focus of this story is trying to find like cooperation and trying to rebuild to fight against a bigger threat. That bigger threat being, Vlad. And also, I forgot to mention, but Vlad also has his little girlfriend as well. Her name is Octavia the Rat. Octavia, is one of the gourds that, was constructed and built by, by Vlad, and she became one of his closest like allies and whatnot, right? So, and also the like felons that tried to rob the place got transmutated like when they were going through the portal and whatnot. They're also going to be a threat that comes back in the story, but that's basically all you need to know about the D'Angelo Bros. Who knows? I'll make a second part to this video kind of going a little more in depth about these characters, but that's kind of what we have so far for that. Now, finally, on to the third story. And this story has so much more lore and so much more juice in it, and I'm really excited to talk about it. That being Hopalong Valley. Adventures in Hopalong Valley. The Adventures in Hopalong Valley. Now, what is this one about? When I mention hop, you guys are thinking rabbits, right? Basically, the story focuses more on like anthropomorphized rabbits and whatnot, right? So let's kind of take a step back and kind of look at like before everything happened. Let's kind of focus on these three characters: Hazel, Meadow, and Dmitri Gortash. Now, that name is going to be really important because that's going to come up later. Basically, Dmitri was a very like high valued, and well respected sorcerer in the chapel of Helia. Excuse me, Helia being the avatar of the sun, as I mentioned before. So she's one of the more like, powerful avatars to ever exist, right? So he basically helped build the chapel of Helia, and basically helped ran the place and whatnot. But one day he found Meadow and Hazel and brought them into the chapel. So over time they learned to train and practice, and were able to basically grow together as a family and whatnot. And however, there's this trial that was coming up, and this trial, Gortash, at least for like Meadow and Hazel, they're able to pass. They basically passed with like flying colors because they were trained under Gortash. Now it was Gortash's turn. I'm basically kind of going a little bit quickly because I actually wrote a whole story about Dmitri Gortash in my playwriting class, and I'm really glad to how it turned out and whatnot. Basically, Gortash very much like he passed all the other trials with flying colors and absolute ease. However, there was this one trial that he had to pass in order to become a Grand Master of Light. So with that, he basically had to keep an eye on the candle for 48 hours. So probably one of the easiest tasks is just very much make sure that the candle stays lit for 2 days. So he does it. He's able to do it just fine until the very last minute the candle goes out. And with Gortash, he very much, he gets upset by this. He's like, what happened? What's going on? Why did the candle like forsake me and whatnot? And Helia explains to him that it wasn't the candle that forsaked him, but instead it was something else. She doesn't explain it to Gortash, but very much the whole like thing behind the test, it wasn't the candle, but it was understanding that you have like faults and whatnot, that you're flawed, and instead of like saying like, oh, why is this happening to me? Instead, at least when it happened to Hazel and Meadow, when their candle went out at the last moment, they were like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. like I failed the test and whatnot. So they learned like to bend. They learned to have humility and whatnot. Gortash wasn't so lucky. He instead, the reason why he, thought that he was better than everyone else is because Halia herself said that she saw greatness in Gortash. And instead of thinking that, oh, Halia sees greatness in me, so I want to better myself each and every day to try to be the greatness that Halia saw, he instead misconstrued it as very much like, I am without fault. I am perfect because Halia said I'm perfect and whatnot, right? So that's basically the foundation to where it's going to be building up to now. I may post my I may post my actual story to some website. I'm not really sure yet because it's just words. It's not really like pictures or anything, but I'm really proud to how it came out. So if you guys want me to post that script, I would love to try to find a place or somewhere to where I can actually post it so you guys could read it. But anywho, let's kind of focus back onto, Hopalong Valley. What is Hopalong Valley about? Hopalong Valley basically focuses on the main character. He is an apprentice of the Sun Rabbit or the Royal Hares, that being Meadow and Hazel. So they are part of the story and whatnot. His name is Sparky Smarts. Go figure. He's a bit of a bookworm, and he's very much a socially awkward bookworm, but he very much is trying his best and trying to learn the world that's around him and whatnot, right? So it focuses also on these 5 other rabbits. Frosty Whiskers, who is a lot more energetic party girl who loves to, make desserts and make, parties and whatnot. And then there's Willie O. Creeks, who, who's a British rock star and likes to have fun and also likes to be free and rebellious. And then there's Barney Blitz, who's more of the athletic, like outgoing, party dude, I guess you could say. He's not on the same level as like Frosty, but he very much is like, he likes to have fun and whatnot, right? So that's him. And then there's Branch Grazer, who is also she's the oldest of the group, and she very much focuses more or less on her farm. She's a carrot farmer, and she that's kind of her main job, is just pulling carrots. And she's more of the mother of the group. She's the most mature, and she's the most well-rounded, level-headed and whatnot. And then there's Mary Cottonheart. Mary Cottonheart is going to be a really vital and really interesting character later on, because they come across a giant stone hippo golem named General Hippo. Afro, where the heck did this come from? I'm going to get to it. Let me explain. So basically, the hippo golem was created by Gortash to be part of his army known as the Seasons of Woe. And so basically he created these golems to help purge the land and get rid of all that is good and whatnot. So these were a formidable threat because they took on titans, they took on kings, they took down villages. Their reign was so bad that even saying their name caused chills down everyone's spine. Even just the utter of the name, the Seasons of Woe or General Raven or General Hyena, just those names alone cause so much fear and panic that no one dares say their name and whatnot. So General Hippo is basically imprisoned inside of not Hopalong Valley itself, but in another prison in the mountains. But then he breaks out and makes it to Hopalong Valley, and basically he outpowers everything that Hopalong throws at him. All the poor little rabbit soldiers that were thrown at him, all the magic that the rabbit sorcerers could come up with, there was nothing. They couldn't do anything physically against him. Anything sort of magic just kind of bounced off of him because he had a seal that Gortash placed on him that was an anti-magic seal. So basically it looked like Hopalong was very much doomed and whatnot. However, Mary came up with an idea. Let's talk to him. Let's just kind of get an understanding with him. Everyone looked at her like she was speaking Greek. What are you talking about? What do you mean? Just talk to the golem. So, everyone was not on board, but Mary decided to take it into her own hands. So, as she was kind of fixing out a picnic, she just saw this 9 foot tall golem walking towards her, and she stood her ground. She very much just got a little picnic basket, kind of took out a little foods and whatnot. The golem just walked on past her. He knew what his mission was, and he didn't want anything to stop him. So before he was about to take down the Tower of Wonder, Mary stops him and is like, "Hey, do you want to have a picnic?" It's like very much like not confrontational, but very much like not a sarcastic way, but she was very much like, "Hey, you look like you're pretty hungry, you're pretty famished and whatnot." Obviously, like she knew that he was fighting against like the armies and whatnot, so she kind of used that to her advantage. And so, the thing about these golems and whatnot is that they can feel different things. Like it takes a long time for it to happen, but they very much do run off of a power source. Not the hate, but it was very much another power source that Gortash gave to them and whatnot. So they do need to eat, sleep, blah blah blah. But it takes a while for them to actually feel that way, right? So, with the hippo fighting for nearly hours and whatnot, he decides, you know what, fine, I guess I'll have a picnic again, but as soon as I'm finished, that Tower of Wonder's going down and it's all gonna be on you. And she's like, okay. Like she very much just like blissfully just kind of grabs his like giant finger. Now keep in like he is a giant guy, like he's a big boy, compared to all these rabbits and whatnot, right? So she just kind of guides him back to the picnic and kind of just treats him to a nice little picnic. She like asks him different types of questions, and it very much boils down to, so why do you want to take down the Tower of Wonder? And it's like, because my master told me, my creator told me that I need to. And it's like, well, yeah, your master told you to, but do you want to? And he's like, well, yes, because my master told me to. And it's like, but do you want to? And with that question alone, he just kind of stops and he just like thinks to himself like, do I want to? Like he very much, with that conversation, he has an existential crisis of like why he's like doing this. He was built to like destroy and whatnot, but he never like questioned it because his master told him to do it. But very much of like this little rabbit is just like, do you want to take down the Tower of Wonder? It's like I mean, I don't know. My master told me to, and my master created me, so yeah, I guess. And it's like, but do you want to? It's it very much is like, oh, okay, I guess I don't really have free will. I just do what my master tells me to and whatnot, right? So obviously he stops himself. The golem very much is like, I guess I don't really want it. Like I'm kind of like freebasing it and whatnot, right? I'm kind of just going off from memory, but very much she does get imprisoned again. But Mary wants him out of prison. She believes that with that conversation alone, that kind of helps build the foundation to understanding and whatnot, right? So she talks to Sparky, and Sparky talks to the royal hairs, and they kind of let him out. But they let him out on one condition, that if anything were to happen, it would be on Mary. So the hippo and Mary basically kind of bond and, kind of spend time with one another. And so Mary asks the hippo, do you have a name? And the hippo responds, Hippo, my name is General Hippo. And she says, that's not a very good name. I have a better name for you. And he goes, what is that? And she says, Jonah. Jonah, I like Jonah. And like he thinks about it and he says, Jonah. That is a very good name. So, thus, the hippo is no longer called the hippo, but he goes by Jonah. So, Jonah and Mary, they kind of spend a lot more time together and they, bond. And, Jonah learns the error of his ways. He apologizes and whatnot. And, friendship all around, right? So, then, unfortunately, with him not entirely leaving his past behind, comes the Seasons of War, which were basically the other like generals that General Hippo or Jonah fought alongside in their past life and whatnot. So they come back, they kind of wreak havoc, and then Jonah kind of leaves Hopalong for a little bit to take revenge. But then he's mind controlled, and then Jonah destroys a little bit of Hopalong. He feels guilty, and so he goes after Gortash. So, a bit, again, I'm kind of speeding through this because basically, it's a lot to tell, and I don't want to spoil too much. And honestly, I don't know if I should continue because I think I may have mentioned this in my not last, but my miscellaneous video. But very much, I don't know if I already said this in my last video, and I really don't want to spoil it. But if I already said it in my last video, I guess I'll just say it here. Jonah dies. I know, dies is very much a strong thing to say. He doesn't die, but he very much, he does lose his life because he does destroy Gortash and whatnot, right? So with Gortash gone, so does his magic and whatnot. So unfortunately, Jonah does perish. But before he perishes, Mary holds on to his, she's the one closest to Jonah. Not to say that his other friends weren't there, or the other rabbits weren't there consoling, Jonah in his final moments, but very much Mary was holding on to him. And before he, goes, I guess she hears a voice, and that voice being Helia. Helia recognizing that Jonah not only fought to protect the plains, but also fought and, not took out, but very much stopped Gortash's reign. She gives him another chance. So, with that, Jonah's soul, quote unquote, leaves his body. And, Mary holds on to it because it's just a tiny little fracture, not a fracture, but a tiny little spirit. It looks so fragile in her hands. And, Helia decides, I can grant him another life, but it's only up to him if he wants to stay. So, Mary holding on to Jonah's, little spirit in her hands, she asks the little spirit, do you wish to stay? And, the spirit kind of has little tendrils, and it wraps its little, it's going to be so cute when I draw it out, but very much Jonah does want to stay. He wants to stay with Mary. He wants to stay with Hopalong. He realizes that he's found his new home, and he wants to stay. He wants to actually live. So Mary places, she kisses the little soul and places it back inside of Jonah. And basically, Helia uses the power of the light and summons Jonah to come back to life. However, he doesn't come back as a golem, but as a real hippo. So he comes back as a real hippo. It's great, and it's really cute and also really sad. At least it's not sad, but it's very much a somber moment, and probably one of my favorite moments I've ever written and whatnot. And I know I kind of briefed a lot past, but we're very much about to hit 55 minutes. We're at 52:30 now, so anywho, that's kind of what I have so far. There's very much other stories that focuses on these other characters, but there's just so many of them. Especially in the main cast, we already have 6 characters. So, they're going to have their very own stories, and so does Sparky, obviously. But I wanted to kind of go over Jonah because, one, he was Mary and Jonah were kind of the first ever characters I've ever had when it comes to Hopalong, because I actually had a dream about them. I went to this garden, and it was very much a little rabbit with wings, kind of just, hopping along and hop along, kind of going about and minding her business. And she was with her giant, hippo friend. So I had a dream about that, and I was just that's really cute. I want to expand on that. So, kind of gonna have to cut that a little short because there's a lot of other spoilers and not really gonna get into, but Gortash does come back, and you guys must be wondering, how does Gortash have all this power? It's because of the hate. The hate came back, and so, yeah, that's kind of the reason why he fell into it, is because Odemius, or the hate, very much control over his heart, and, kind of took over his mind and kind of took him down a path of darkness and whatnot, right? So that's kind of the idea of the hate, is that it very much can consume you and turn you into a worse version of yourself, and you have to be extremely careful when it comes to letting the hate consume you and whatnot, right? So, I when it comes to these three stories, I'm kind of glad that there is a consistency when it comes to using the hate and whatnot. And it comes in very different ways, at least for the most part anyway, right? So, anywho, with all that being said, I know I kind of just rambled on about this brand new universe and how these characters are. And I know I kind of went fast and whatnot, but I think I have a good stable foundation to how I'm going to write these characters and how I'm going to go about writing these characters. So, I just want to say thank you all so much for, taking the time to watch my videos. I know this one's going to be a bit of a longer one, but you know what? I'm kind of glad it's a little bit of a longer one because I like making these videos and I love taking the time to make these videos. And I'm so glad that I have an audience to watch these videos. So with all that being said, thank you all so much for your time. Thank you all so much for watching. I have been AfroMandias, and I hope you guys, take the time to spend time with your families. Happy early Mother's Day, by the way. I know that's coming up. So, spend time with your mothers. Tell them how much they mean to you, how much you love them and whatnot. And, because they try each and every day and they put their backs and forths into this to make sure that you guys are happy. And so I just want to give a nice, beautiful shout out to one of the most amazing women, that being my mom. Mom, if you are watching this, thank you. And I love you so, so very much. But with all that being said, I hope you guys have a safe and happy Mother's Day. Y'all stay safe. I have been AfroMandias. Thank you all so much for watching, and stay fresh and stay frosty, Afrolytes. I'll catch y'all next time.